We ready? Okay, thank you, everybody. We appreciate you all being here tonight. My name is Mike Haynes. I know many of you, but for those of you who I haven't met, I am the Development Services Director here at the city. Before we get started, let me address a couple of housekeeping items. I think you all have an agenda, so you know we've got a full evening tonight. The quarters are a little tight here, but we are going to ultimately be breaking out into our focus groups, and we'll make sure we make that work. And bathrooms and water fountains are right outside the door, and we've got lots of staff here if you have any questions or you need anything. Let me do introductions. First of all, we have our city staff here. Laval Means, to my right, is the project manager for the city, our planning manager. And also we have Tom, Jen, Casey, Leslie, and Anita, if you would like to identify yourselves. And also we have our consultant team, Bob and Kate and Jana. Please just wave your arms or something. I just want to let you know that, a tremendous amount of work has been done by this group up front, and they've really done a huge amount of work to provide the resources to the focus groups, everything that you guys are going to need to really be productive and do some great work. So I want to thank them for all the work that they've done already. And of course, that group will continue to move the process forward. After the focus groups have met, they will be ultimately working with the focus groups and the steering committee. They'll ultimately be the group that is responsible for writing the growth policy document and going through the adoption process. And finally, we do have some grad students here. They are going to be helping facilitate the focus groups. So we've got a great group of staff here available to help you guys. As I mentioned when we had the very first meeting for the growth policy, I mentioned at the time, as a planner, I'm not totally unbiased, but I would argue that the growth policy really is the key document for the city of Missoula. It establishes goals aimed at making the community better, objectives to reach those goals, and actions required to achieve those objectives. So it's a planning document, and I know that can seem dry, but it is grounded in and has real-world effects in terms of decision-making, actions, and outcomes. So I want to just really emphasize how important the work of the focus groups is going to be, and we're very excited to have you guys here and participating. The growth policy, of course, ultimately is a vision for our shared future. It's going to serve as a blueprint for growth and development, and a wide range of decisions that are made by City Council is going to be guided by the conformance with or the divergence from this growth policy. So I can't overemphasize how important that's going to be. So looking forward, again, we have an amazing group of community members that have volunteered their support, and I really appreciate you being here tonight and sticking with this process. So over the next 5 meetings, you'll get to know your fellow team members. I would suggest that you ask good questions, that you listen to each other and share your ideas, debate and discuss the merits of different people's ideas and suggestions. And ultimately, of course, the idea is to seek some general agreement on these goals, objectives, and actions that are the core of the growth policy. I think in many cases, the groups will be able to find consensus, but just remember that's not always possible, and sometimes that's okay when we're dealing with big picture issues. Everybody does not necessarily have to be exactly on the same page, but we're obviously looking for some general agreement on some of the key principles. And most of all, Commit to the process, have an open mind, be creative. I think you'll find this is a creative process, and have fun. I think you'll find that if you do that, this will be a thought-provoking, challenging, and rewarding exercise for you all. And again, the results of this growth policy have a real-world, lasting, positive impact on the city of Missoula. So I want to thank you very much for your participation in the process. And with that, I'm going to hand it right over to Bob Horn. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mike, for those opening remarks. I, too, want to extend my welcome this evening. My name is Bob Horn, and together with my lovely spouse and business partner, Kate McMahon, we are Applied Communications. We have teamed with Jana Cooper of Thomas, Dean, and Hoskins of Great Falls. Applied Communications is out of Whitefish. And we've been contracted by the City of Missoula to assist with the community involvement phase of the growth policy update. And so it's my honor to kick the program off here this evening. So why are we here? We are updating the growth policy because it's time to. A growth policy is a dynamic document, and it must be looked at from time to time. You have to check your assumptions, your projections. It's a living document, as Mike said. Next. What is a growth policy? A growth policy is a consensus vision of where the community wants to be in the future. It's a broad body of public policy that cuts across all of the components of community building. So it will have, the elements are listed on the slide behind me. It'll have a land use element, economic development, transportation, housing, natural resources, facilities and services, implementation, just as I said, everything that you need to consider in community building. It also contains data, trends, a lot of data to give us an idea of what direction the community is heading, and Tom Zavitz of the staff will discuss some of those with you a little bit later. The growth policy is required by Montana law. If you are going to implement land development regulations, which are a zoning code, a permit system, subdivision well, no, let's just stick to zoning and permit system. If you're going to administer land development regulations, you must have a growth policy in place. The growth policy must provide the legal and rational foundation for the regulations. If you're going to come up with regulations, say for affordable housing, okay, for the bulk and scale of buildings, you have to make the case for that in the growth policy. This is where we do the foundation work for the future implementation measures. Also, many grant programs are tied to community support that's reflected in a growth policy. Treasure State Endowment, for example, looks to the growth policy, and that is an opportunity to demonstrate community support for a particular project for which you may be applying for grant funds. The adoption process is, next please, is specified by state law. This is the formal adoption process once we get through with our work here. It's set forth in the sections of state law that we've got here on the screen. Don't worry about writing any of this down. The excerpts from state law will be in your focus group guidebook. Okay. This is the process that we have been following to date. See those 6 blue vertical boxes? That's where we are. We're at the beginning of the process. We started with 30, I believe actually 31 listening sessions. That information is being taken and fed into the focus group exercise, which is again what we're starting here this evening. What you folks will be doing, I'll tell you what, I'll leave that slide where it is right now, but here's the basic flow of things. Listening session, focus group, steering committee, and onto the planning board and through their workshopping and ultimately the formal process. We anticipate adoption of the growth policy by the end of 2015. Next, please. This is the timeline that we are following. We're anticipating, I believe Mike explained that the focus group process kick off tonight, first work meeting in November, and we're scheduled to meet through. You have to buy the beer after the meeting, okay? That's on you, Paul, okay? I'm sure they take credit cards. We anticipate the focus groups will be doing their work through March. Sometime after the first of the year, probably in the January timeframe, the steering committee will start up. So there will be some overlap between the steering committee and focus group, and I'll explain the reason for that in just a moment. Next, please. The 30 listening sessions. These were topic-based listening sessions. We had one on transportation. We had some on sustainability. We had some on education. We had one on aging, healthcare, health delivery, recreation, all the various topics that you want to explore whenever you're putting together a growth policy. And we conducted these in just about the same manner. We asked people what they value about the Missoula community, so much so that they want to see those values preserved as the community grows and changes through time, which it inevitably will. We asked them what challenges they see to those values that they just identified. What challenges do you see that may threaten those values in the future? And finally, what resources, collaborations, plans, programs, legislation, whatever, are needed to be brought to bear to address the challenges? And I have to tell you, in the process of discussing those three questions, we came out with some incredible information, incredible depth and breadth of information about the topics, about the challenges that people see lie ahead, what they value about the community, things that they want to see preserved, and really what we need to address those challenges down the road. Six focus groups, that's why we're here: economic health, environmental quality, safety and wellness, livability, housing, and community design. What you folks will be doing is taking the work, once again, take the work of the listening sessions and coming up with goals, objectives, and actions in your particular area of focus, depending on the particular group that you're in. As I said, the steering committee, next. The steering committee will begin work while you folks are still working, and they will take your work, review it for consistency, the issues addressed, any policy gaps, any clarification. They may ask the focus groups to go back and get more information, to generate more information about something that may not be clear, or if they identify some issues that maybe hadn't been fleshed out before. So there will be some interaction and some feedback, okay, between the steering committee and the focus group, but that will come later in your process after you folks have already had a chance to formulate an initial set of goals, objectives, and actions. Eventually, this will all go to the planning board. I expect that they will workshop it too. They will hold public work sessions, and eventually we go into the public process that I described earlier in this presentation that involves the public hearings. As far as next steps, the next steps for the focus group, finalize the meeting schedule for the focus groups when
in the breakout session.
The breakout session, okay, yes. In the breakout session, we'll talk about scheduling focus groups. We should have that finalized by the end of this month. Setting up an easy link for finding focus group information, and I believe, Casey, that has been done? Yeah, okay. Okay. I thought it looked darn good, okay. I went to it this afternoon. Summary of the listening sessions, the information that I talked about that the listening sessions generated for your benefit should be up by November 7th. and posting of goals, objectives for existing plans, background information, also by November 7th. And there is a context of plans and processes that are already in place. And right after I get through speaking, Laval Means will talk to you about those documents and processes. Asset mapping ideas, and your next meeting will be sometime during the week of November 19th. Next. Questions we'd like to hold for the Q&A at the end so that we can take questions on all the things we covered this evening. But I would just like to say personally, I am really, really excited for you folks, for what you're about to embark upon. I was at all 30 of these listening sessions. I saw the energy in those rooms. I saw the quality of the information that they generated. I saw the passion in those people when they identified what they valued and what they feel like the challenges are to those values. They've generated a tremendous amount of information for you to go forward and take the next steps. So thank you again for volunteering. I'd like to call on Laval.
Whatever. Okay, thank you. You can just go to the next slide. I echo what Mike and Bob has said. Thank you so much for coming forward, and it's wonderful to see all you folks interested in participating in Missoula's future, really, and our Missoula. So there's more background for you to know, and what I'm tasked with here is to provide you with a little more context. And I'm really only going to just touch on things. If you are interested in some of the material that I'm describing, then you could go to the website and find out more information. I'm just going to be brushing over a few elements that are helpful background context for you all. There's a host of information, and I didn't want to overwhelm you in that way, but you can also contact me if you'd like to know more about certain pieces. So first off, we do have two main guiding documents for the City of Missoula that shape our community planning and policies. They are the county growth policy, Missoula County Growth Policy, that was adopted by the city and the county, meets all the requirements for the state's growth policy, and was most recently amended in 2008. The other document that guides the urban area is the Missoula Urban Area Comprehensive Plan, and it was adopted in 1998. So much older, has a lot more detail in it. What you'll find when we look at growth policy planning, that the closer in your study area, the more detail you can get into. So the county plan's very general. The urban area plan is a little more specific. And then the next plan, or our study area actually, is going to be even a little smaller than that. So we might find we get into more conversation and detail. I'm hoping that in the end, this isn't a plan that is like really, really hefty because we have so much detail. We have to be concise and clear and careful and realistic in that end. So this planning process is going to replace those two plans that I just described. So it will be an amendment, an update, a replacement of what we've been using. Go back to the study area. That will show you that this is a plan that the study area actually comes from what we refer to as our urban service area, which is the same boundary essentially as a wastewater sewer study area boundary. It does include all of the city limits, and you can see it with kind of the lighter color up there on the map. It also includes some county jurisdiction. So this is a study area that is a boundary that has been established in past planning projects, so that's why it's important that we continue to use that. So going on then, what I want to do with this conversation about context is describe a little bit more about some of the other plans and processes that we have in place and that are going on right now. The first one is to talk about the Urban Fringe Development Area Plan. I'm going to provide some background to you on that. It's a planning process that you'll continue to hear a little bit about while we're working on this planning process. We see the UFTA project as a foundation for the city's growth policy because it provides good direction with the scenario that they settled on called the focus inward, and it also provides a host of detail. There's a lot of data in it. So for various reasons, it is a foundational document for us, and there is a lot of information online that you can look at if you're interested. The boundary is the same as what we're talking about. Data gathered during that process is information that we'll be using now, and then we'll be updating while we keep working on this plan. The resulting scenario, as I mentioned from UFTA, is a focus inward scenario that we are continuing to develop in this process. And the UFTA project resulted in an amendment to the growth policy, so it is an official framework for the city when I talk about it. And part of that amendment was to include a residential allocation map that we will need to review in this process also. So that kind of helps to inform housing, it helps to inform service provisions, and it helps to inform community design. But when we were working on that plan in 2007 and 2008, it was before the economic downturn. So we know that there's more re-evaluation of that information that we're going to have to do, and that means while this is a foundation, we might still be looking at new ideas on the residential allocation. We will still be looking at new ideas on the resource provisions and other things. So it is kind of an evolving thing. Some of the main reasons that we worked on the UFTA plan was to address whether there was actually enough capacity to plan for growth within the existing urban service area boundary that I showed you the map of. Well, with that focus inward scenario, we were able to say, yes, there is enough capacity. The other reason that we wanted to work on that plan was to provide some sense of a comprehensive understanding of where future residential development could occur so that it wasn't something that we were constantly reacting to in a piecemeal fashion. So we did that by focusing on the UFTA plan really is more of a residential tool. And that's one of the bigger differences when we're talking about the growth policy. We also are considering commercial and industrial, economic. There are other pieces of it, so we'll be expanding this concept even further. But in the UFTA plan, what we were trying to address was where would the next 15,000 residential units occur within the community. And the process, that process was documented in a residential allocation map. The process and the maps are going to be, they help to become predictable elements for neighborhoods and for agencies as we were planning for future services and where resources should be focused on. So those are the ways that that project has been helpful so far. The next slide I'm going to show you is actually the, oh yeah, keep on going, UFTA.
Okay.
At the time when we were looking at the framing of that project, we were really feeling overwhelmed. And you all know probably from 2005 to 2007, 2008, there was a lot of development activity going on. And it just happened to mean that in like Norwegian kind of phrasing, that concept of being overwhelmed. So we felt like that was really working with us in that way. So the next slide shows you the allocation map that I'm talking about. What we did is we, through that process and through some community engagement also, and showed several different scenarios and determined that, that the focus inward scenario was a preferred approach, and that resulted in allocating certain numbers of residential units all around the community. And what we've been doing is kind of a living document because we keep track of that every year, and we've been updating the numbers to see whether we're getting closer to that allocation. It's the numbers of allocated units are dropping, the number of build-out units are going up, and it just kind of keeps evolving. So a few of the concepts I mentioned here, focus inward a couple times. And It was a preferred scenario for the UFTA and was elevated in several other recent planning processes like the transportation plan and the transit plan. And it is a foundational element from the resolution that the City Council passed in supporting this process. So we have the opportunity with this process to explore what else that might mean to the community, besides what we've talked about in residential terms, but maybe even with some adjustments and more detail when we think about it for residential and housing and everything else about our community. So generally, when we think of focusing inward, we mean that it's about encouraging growth contiguously and compactly near our community core, rather than spreading out and really consuming so much open land and agricultural areas. It also means encouraging new growth in direction of existing infrastructure and public services. This is something that can help to keep the costs of services sustainable for us, and I think a very important goal. It also means consideration of the revitalization of our community while also still respecting the established areas. So there's a lot to think about there, there's a lot of challenge there, and there's a lot of room for us to fill out what we mean by that for our whole community. So some of the other processes that are underway right now and have to do with planning around Missoula is that the Missoula County is just starting to work on an update to their growth policy. It actually just started last week with some public engagement all around the regions of the county. So they're going to be on a similar track as us, and we'll need to be clear and careful to not confuse people with what we're working on. Make sure when you're talking about it with your friends and coworkers or whatever, say city growth policy or Our Missoula, because there is going to be county planning processes going on as well. But, really, seriously, the coordination between the city and the county is a really important thing. It's not just because the city requires, or the state requires that we address interjurisdictional coordination, but we really need to be thinking about it because it's the right thing to do to prepare for growth. And we plan to do this on several different levels. We are going to be coordinating with staff. So right at the staff level, we'll keep updating each other on what we're learning and how the process is going. We'll also be giving updates to the Urban Growth Commission, which is an official city and county government elected officials and agencies that meet on a quarterly basis. And so there's going to be a few ways, I think, also in your conversations while you're thinking about things like infrastructure, land use, city services, that remembering that we're thinking about what happens it's a city plan, but so what happens if those lands are annexed into the city and what that might mean to our services and how overall, we all feed into the city when we are thinking about economic development and health of our community. So there's certainly a lot of relationships. So to kind of switch gears a little bit, I was going to just touch on the fact that we do have a lot of attachments to our current growth policy that are in the form of more specific neighborhood plans and what we call issue-based plans. The neighborhood plans are sub-area plans around our community. Not all parts of the community have those. And the issue-based plans are plans like a transportation plan, a parks plan, infrastructure plans, that kind of thing. And they will continue to provide locally specific guidance for us. And they'll inform this process. And we're going to try to provide some summary goals and objectives from those plans for you so you don't have to wade through the pages and pages and pages of all those documents. But I also want to really, stress that this isn't a process where you should think that you're restricted by those plans. We really do want to move forward, be thinking about new great ideas, be exploring things, and so keep that in mind also. These plans are going to inform us, but they should not restrict our ideas and our explorations. Ultimately, the plans, neighborhood plans and issue plans need to be consistent with the growth policy. And this process should provide recommendations for how to develop new plans, future neighborhood plans, and strategies for updating those existing plans. So that's something to think about in probably a few of those focus groups. There are some other processes that are going on that will become information that can inform various focus groups as well. One is the community health assessment. That is something that's being done by the health department, and they have a document that's out in draft form. That's the kind of information that can help to inform, say, the safety and wellness group. The countywide housing market analysis, that's information that can help to inform the housing focus group. The industrial lands analysis that's being done for the county and the city, that's information that can help to inform the economic health and community design focus groups, perhaps. And then the school district, you all probably know about that. They've been working on a strategic plan. Information from that can help to inform livability and community design and probably some other things. So we're going to do some of the work of making sure that we're informed about it. If you see something in there where you want to know something more specifically, you now know that it's out there, so you can check on it yourself. But you can also talk with us and elevate some ideas and issues through your focus group work. So finally, the last thing that I wanted to bring to your attention is this component of our growth policy project that we've been working on, and it's called the Missoula Asset Mapping. It's something that we rolled out a couple weeks ago when we had some open houses and some community meetings regarding it. And it is actually a partnership that we're working on with the Sonoran Institute through their Community Builders Initiative. What it's going to do is provide visual depiction, or what it does is it provides visual depiction of all the place-based types of assets and challenges around our community. And then the Sonoran is going to help to map those so that we can get a good visual sense of where are these highly valued places and where are the places where we have challenges. That information is going to help to inform our policy discussions and probably the land use considerations. So I'm really excited to see where that goes. The next slide here tells you what, the other way, tells you a little bit about next steps on that. You all are still able to weigh in on it if you haven't already. There's an online survey through the Community Builders website, and I'd really encourage you as focus group members to check that out. Input your ideas on what our assets and challenges are, or perhaps photos of certain places. That website's going to be up until November 5th. Then the group is going to be back in town on November 12th to show us a first draft of those various maps. Their final report will be ready for us about the beginning of January. Some points we will be feeding what we're hearing from that back to you all as focus group members. So I think it'll be a great little kind of energy boost at some point in this process. So with that, I think that gives you, some of the background. Let me know if you've got questions at the one-on-one or during the Q&A. But right now, I'm going to pass it over to Tom Zavitz, and he's going to give you some key data and trend considerations. Thanks.
Hi, thanks, Laval. I have a whole bunch of charts and graphs. It's a lot of information. I really don't want to get into the detail with it. The information comes from our existing conditions report that we're putting together. And so I've chosen a few areas of our report to give you some, what I'm kind of calling key trends or key data, some things that have sort of stuck out. I think some of you have seen some of these in the recent past, but maybe not all at once and in the same place. So these are just things that we want you to be thinking about as you go into the focus groups. Even though they may not be related to what you're doing, I think most of them are in some way or another. If not directly related, they do have some other implications here. So let's just get right into them without too much more comment. These are the actual areas that we cover in our existing conditions report. I'm not going to cover all of those tonight, but just some of the more key things that I think are more impactful to the community. So let's go right to the next slide, which is the population of the city over the last century. And, I think you can see that it's got a really relatively steady growth rate. Right now, the state is predicting that we're going to, the the city or the urban area is going to be growing at about 1% per year for the next few years. And that means when we think about where our growth policy takes us, which is 2030, 2035, that we'll probably have about 19,000 more people in the area by then. Okay, and you can go to the next slide. And with regard to those people and the people that are here, this is the silver tsunami slide. I don't know if you have seen this before, but we're down on the orange line is the important line here, and it shows the age group 65 years and older. And as you can see, in reflecting the baby boom, that right now the 65-year-old group is about 12% of the population. By the end of our growth policy time period here, it will double as far as percentage and be closer to 25% of our population. So that's going to have a pretty big impact on what we're doing here today. And I could talk a lot about it, but especially maybe in housing choices or social services. Let's go to the next one, which is representation of what drives our economy. This is labor earnings, but what I think I should point out here are the four big parts of our economy, and this shows them well. Not surprisingly, healthcare, number one, business professional services, number two, state, federal government, number three, and I think a lot of that here in our area is the university. And then the fourth leg of our table is retail, wholesale, trade. Pretty simple representation of our income per capita. This chart is not adjusted for inflation, but shows a fairly steady rise over time. And also when talking about the economy here in Missoula, I think we need to keep in mind that we have a poverty rate that is a little bit above the national average. And so in Missoula, where we have 17% of our population living at or below the poverty line. Median housing price, I think this is pretty familiar. You can see that we've pretty much rebounded from the recession in our area, and this only goes to 2013, so I believe that has continued. Cost burden households, hear about this a lot. 40% of households in Missoula are cost burdened, and so cost burdened means families or people who are spending more than a third of their monthly income on housing. Not, and if at over 30 or 1/3, that becomes a stressor, not a great thing. Homeless population in Missoula has continued to rise over time. And if you look at the numbers on the left, and if I go back a little bit, you can see that it's really almost doubled since 2000. So that's another significant thing to be keeping in mind. And actually the homeless issue, as much as anything, really weaves throughout all of the areas of our city. This is a table of our zoning and the percentage of each type of zoning. So if you'll first look at the table on the right, I think the thing that sticks out the most is that half of our zoning in the city is residential. And then if you look at public, the other big percentage, most of that is represented through open space. So if you take out the open space, which you know is a lot of hillsides and things, residential goes way above 50%, and really most of our city zoning is residential. Not unusual, but then I want to carry that one little step further and break down the residential on the table on the left, and that shows something that is kind of an issue in our town. We've had a couple people bring this to our attention, and that is that the multi-dwelling zoning area in our city is really low. And what that does at this point in time is it causes us to use commercial land for developing multi-dwelling projects, which it's allowed in our commercial zoning, so a lot of it happens there. And I think the thought is, should we be thinking about more zoning that's laid out in particular for multi-dwelling projects? So, and then the next slide relates right to that, and this slide shows how much and what type of development we've done as far as residential goes recently, and the purple represents multi-dwelling units, the red single family, and you can see that most of the development recently has been apartments and condos, and I think you can see that going on around town right now as well. Where is the development going on? Essentially west of Reserve and Reserve to Russell. The west part of town, there is some in East Missoula, some along Brooks, but mostly to the west of the city and the western part of the city. Another similar map, this one shows that and where our undeveloped entitled lots are in this urban area. This matches up really close to the urban services area. And you can see here that, again, most of our entitled lots are in the western part of the city, and the orange bar graphs show where recent development has occurred. So again, in that West Mullen area as well. Some basic information about the university. This is the university population. It really closely mirrors the population of the city over time. I think the main point for me here was that of the about 14,000 students at the university, 10,000 live off campus. That's a little bit high for the average college or town with a college in it. Usually there are more students housed on campus, but for Missoula, 10,000 students living off campus represents a lot of rentals and things like that. Utilities are, I didn't have much interesting about our utilities. I think they're all in very good shape and that we have a lot of capability there, aside from broadband, which, as you know, we're looking into, and I think that the schools are in need of better broadband and what we're calling next generation broadband. So this is going to be one of our utility issues as we go forward. Health and wellness, I could talk a lot about a lot of things here. I think Missoula is generally a healthier than average town, and that we're a healthier than average city. Kind of shows up in these obesity figures, childhood obesity, that we're at about 27% in Missoula. The national average is about 31%. But then with the suicide rate, Missoula, we're in Missoula County and the state as a whole, we're really at the high side there. And some have said, well, what does that have to do with land use? And really, it's not directly related, but I think quality of life, it plays into quality of life really well, and quality of life then plays into many areas that we're going to be looking at. Missoulians like to bike. I think we all know that. We're way above average in that category when compared to the rest of the nation, as well with walking as a form of commuting, but we're a little bit below average when it comes to taking the bus to work. Transportation, I didn't have many facts or figures, but the transportation department, these are some of the issues that they're dealing with right now, and mostly in funding. And one of the trends there is that the funding is seems to be changing from more dedicated type funding sources to more competitive sources like grants and things like that. So not going to be as easy to get, and generally there's going to be less. And I'm going to end with some good news. I think that the air quality in Missoula, I've been here for almost 40 years, and at that time we were rated up there with some of the worst places in the country as far as air quality went, especially in the winter, but summer as well, because we had a lot of teepee burners. And we actually made Life magazine in 1969 for that great reason. But since then, several things have come into play where we've reduced wood burning, gone to oxygenated fuels, gotten rid of teepee burners, and now we have very clean air. We have met the carbon monoxide standard since 1991. I don't even think we monitor for that anymore. Same with particulate matter. We're meeting that as far as the federal standards go, although we do violate that on some days in the winter and some days with the forest fire season. But overall, our air quality has really come to a great place. And as well with our water. I think we all know about the mine waste that the Clark Fork had dumped into it for many years, and that it was washed down to us, and the water was really unfit. And the city's buildings at one time, this is where we dumped our garbage, and the backs of the buildings were put up toward the river. And now it's actually a centerpiece of the city, and buildings are starting to face the river again. So that's actually a great story. And that's all I have for right now, and I'm going to hopefully didn't take up too much time, but go to the next. I'm handing it over to Kate.
It's just going to take me a minute.
Can I do that for you?
No, actually, because it's mostly self-planned. Just take me a minute to set up this next slide here. No, it's mostly self-planned. Okay, my name's Kate McMahon, and like Bob, I attended most of the listening sessions, or unlike Bob, he attended all of them, but I attended most of them. So I'm going to just give you a quick, very brief overview of the listening sessions, but I'm not going to talk too much because we took videos of those listening sessions, and we think it's better that you hear from the people who attended themselves. So we're going to be playing some video highlights. You might recognize yourself in them if you attended them, or you might recognize some neighbors and friends. But before we play the video, just some little background. We held the listening sessions in July and September. Like Bob said, we met with about 30 groups. These are some of the groups that we met with, and Bob reviewed them. Bob also talked about the meeting format. When we met with the group, we asked them 3 questions. We recorded all of those that Bob talked about. We recorded all of that information on easel sheets. We've entered them into a spreadsheet. We've coded all of that information, categorized them, and we're in the process of summarizing that. That will be on the web, on the focus group website here within the next few weeks, and you will have all of that information available for you when you start meeting in your individual groups in November. Just a little sneak preview of what we found when we categorized that and did the analysis. We asked people what they valued about Missoula, and these were sort of the top answers that we heard. The natural areas, the access to outdoor recreation was pretty much the #1 concern. And actually the #2, and I don't hear this in a lot of communities I work in around the state, but that Missoula is a very engaged community. They volunteer, they come to meetings. We have no problems at all recruiting people to participate in these focus groups, and people really valued that about the community. The sense of place, that Missoula is unique, that we're not just any town, USA, but that when you come into Missoula, you have a sense of being here. The community being bikeable, walkable, like Tom mentioned, we have a very high rate of biking in this community. We also heard that Missoula is very friendly and family-oriented. It's a good place to raise kids. People want to be here. And the parks in downtown were also valued very much as assets for the community. The downtown, people thought was very vibrant and was something that attracted people here, not only to live, but also as tourists. When it came to challenges, the number one challenge was transportation, parking, and transit. I think if you reserve streets, probably the one that we heard most often as far as having some congestion problem, but also parking downtown. We heard that people wanted, that they thought the transit system was good, but it needed to be expanded in regards to the hours and expanded in some routes too. Land use, zoning, subdivision, like Tom mentioned, there was a lot of need for more. We heard over and over that we need more multifamily zoning, and his statistics sort of bore that out. Environmental quality, while we have good air, good water quality has improved over the years, people were concerned that they wanted to maintain that, but there were also other issues in regards to wildlife, human habitat, conversion of agricultural lands, the air quality during wildfire season. So there were a number of environmental issues that came up. Affordable housing, again, I think Tom's statistics sort of demonstrated what the issues were in that. The growth pressures, 19,000 people between now and 2030. So we heard concern, where are we going to house those people? What's it going to mean as far as demand on services? Do we have the capacity in our schools? Do we have the capacity in public safety and fire department to provide services that? Something that came out across the board for all of the listening sessions were, how are we going to fund the infrastructure that we need? How are we going to fund the programs that we need? And then finally, a top challenge was economic development and job creation, especially good paying jobs. I think you saw that there was a disparity between income and housing, and it made it difficult for young professionals to buy houses. So how can we get good paying jobs? So with that, we're just going to let you hear what everybody said themselves.
Basic industry jobs for Missoula. But if we don't have a comparative advantage in terms of the labor force, or a comparative advantage in terms of quality of life, or a comparative advantage in terms of those things that your email defines as infrastructure, then we're disadvantaged to get the type of industry that we think is going to make this economy healthy and to move forward in the future. So the challenge is how do we work together as a community, including the education systems, to maintain or gain a comparative advantage for the types of industries that we're trying to attract. That's the challenge.
I think Missoula could be the innovator, and the University of Montana could even be the innovator in helping pay living wages and ensure people don't need 2 jobs or 3 jobs just to live in a rental that may be overpriced because so there's all those complicated things that add to what I think is the ability and willingness of our taxpayers to support those things.
Employees you have rely on, world-class broadband speed, and they just frankly don't have it. And the best example I can give to capture that is that when I asked them to really narrow down on what their issues were with broadband, they said to me, the fastest way for them to ensure that they get a large amount of data from one place to another in Montana is to FedEx it. To literally take a hard drive, load it with information, and FedEx it.
I'm doing the same thing with my company.
So
it's not hard to find ways to really make it provide lots of returns financially. But changing the course of a big ship is a big so whether we're talking about our existing businesses that have existing business model, that needs to change. When we have the opportunity to create a growth plan, the economic development plan is what's going to determine where the resources go to a large extent.
Okay.
And that economic development plan needs to include sustainability objectives at the highest level in order for those opportunities to be tapped.
One of the challenges that I see is the ability to maintain the environmental qualities that are so important to this community while planning for growth, because they could be in conflict with each other if we decide to put a 12-story building in this town, and now you can look west and you can't see beyond it. I mean, those kinds of things, that's a balance there for maintaining what's really critically important to what makes Missoula Missoula versus how do you plan for that growth into the future. And I would add that that also includes preservation of agricultural lands.
There isn't any aspect of our community or society that will not be impacted by the aging population, and that heightened awareness needs to be broad-based by business. And I think one of the things I appreciate about today is that it's really one of the first times for myself that I've seen the city or policymakers really taking a look at the impact of aging.
Healthy built environment is very important. A lot of research through CDC and the Institute of Medicine supports healthy built environment and policies to help reduce obesity. And I think we're all on board. We're ready to go. And I think what's important to know is that, in moving forward, anything to do with healthy built environment, that we just need to be aware of it. And I think sometimes in our community that we have a lot of really great, strong leaders and city, county government, and all these folks out there doing great work, and bringing them together with the Let's Move Missoula initiative and the leadership table, which we have representatives here, has been a very valuable tool to our community, and that's a great asset.
Parks and open space bring us together as a community. I mean, these are places where we go with a girlfriend who we haven't seen in a long time, and we have a great conversation. We, raft through town, we climb up Jumbo with friends, and we, meet people we haven't seen out on the trail in a while, and just that, having these wonderful, beautiful spaces where we can build friendships and build trust is just such an important part of having a strong community.
Out of the growth policy update comes a development code update if it doesn't happen at the same time. And how the policymakers tee the ball up on key corridors to make it very attractive and easy for developers to come in goes a long ways to where that development happens. And you have funds that are already in place, like redevelopment funds, that can really sweeten the pot on putting development where you want it in the community. So just a compliment to what you're saying there on, as you look at the full costs of sprawl, conversely, it's important to have policymakers creating great incentives for the developers to get their attention where it ought to take place.
homeless people are not the people that are downtown, by and large. You know, that's a small splinter in the group that Jane's talking about. You know, we've got a lot of people who are working, a lot of people who are on disabilities, and we are trying to get them into housing.
And so from a school perspective, which is what I'm always thinking about, is we would like to have diversity of housing stock in proximity to any school, because that means that we'll always have a wide range of people, grandparents and young children and young families and older families, et cetera, all living in close proximity to one another, and you have subtle transition instead of kind of big dramatic change all at once.
Communities need to be taking the initiative to guide the kind of development that they see, and without that, what you're going to get from a developer that comes in for whatever type of business it is, you're going to get the off-the-shelf model.
Right.
And it's up to the communities to take the initiative and be courageous in asking for something that is better than the off-the-shelf model, and really coming up with a plan for what that development looks like. You have to know what you want the character of your town to be modeling, but more importantly, to take the steps to actually request that, because the first step is to ask. And whether that is through working with the city planners, working with our zoning laws, working with our subdivision regulations, working with our growth policy to have the legal mechanisms in order to give city employees and builders the ability to do that.
Little glitch here, sorry about that.
I appreciate how Missoula has been moving at least some areas at downward pointing street lighting so that the skies are not lit up. I think that negativity of that light coming out and bouncing off the clouds at night is something that I notice that I don't like. But I do appreciate the neighborhood that I live in for those reasons.
So once again, thank you, all of you who came to the listening sessions and participated. And we've got one more presentation here before we get the pizza, and that's going to be from Jana.
Oofda, right? I promise, I'm the last one. Okay, so as she mentioned, I'm Gianna Cooper from TD&H Engineering, and I am part of the consultant team helping the city through the public participation segment of the growth policy. And I'll also be facilitating some of the focus group meetings. The city and the consultant team have put together a focus group guidebook, which can be found online. And I'm just going to take a few minutes to tell you what that's all about and what's in it briefly. The guidebook has been put together to help drive the focus group process and to help each group in starting to develop goals, objectives, and actions. As we get further into this, it's kind of a living document, so we may be adding or taking away depending on what's relevant at the time for each of the meetings. So the first portion, oh yeah, we're still okay. The first portion of the guidebook is an overview of the goals of the public process, and it briefly describes the focus groups. I'm sure you guys are all aware of those by now, that it's economic health, environmental quality, safety and wellness, livability, housing, and community design. And in a moment, we're going to break into groups and kind of do introductions and have a fun game for you guys to do as an icebreaker to get to know one another. Okay, next slide. The second portion of the guidebook explains the inspiration behind the Our Missoula growth policy process and describes in more detail the main theme of the project, which I think you've heard Lavala talk about a lot, looking inward and moving forward. We've also included in that portion the draft vision statement, which was used as a guide for the council's resolution of support, which is also in the guidebook. The third item is the tentative schedule for the project. We've planned monthly focus group meetings for the next 6 months. So there'll be tasks associated with each of these meetings in order to keep us on schedule. And tonight we're going to ask you to fill out, I think when you came in, fill out a scheduling worksheet so we can try and accommodate as many people as possible to get as many people in the meetings as possible. Next slide, please. Communication is the next item, and there are a number of ways to get informed about the project, which are listed, but the number one way is the website, ourmissoula.org. So go there early and often and keep up to date on what's happening. We've also provided contact details for city staff and the consultant team, so if you need to get a hold of anyone, that is available. Then we've also provided some information on open meetings and rules of civil discourse, along with kind of the procedures of how we'd like the meetings to be run. This is just some fun reading for you guys to do. You can go online, download your guidebook, and read through some of this good, exciting information. Next slide. Finally, there's some supplemental information, including excerpts from the Montana Code Annotated related to the statutory regulations for growth policies. And then we've also included some brief definitions of the goals, objectives, and actions, and then some examples of these. And this kind of shows you the process that we're going to be going through, taking the issues from the listening sessions, starting to develop goals, and then objectives, and then actions. And the real goal of the focus group is to create these, and then they'll be moved on to the steering committee and then funneled through to the actual growth policy. So that's why everyone's been so excited that we have so many participants tonight that are excited to be a part of these focus groups and really have this be a growth policy for the community. So again, this is online, and we'd like you to go download it and kind of get familiar with it before the next focus group meeting in November. And again, thank you for your participation, and I think I'm going to hand it back to Bob for any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jana. Thank you to all members of the consultant team and the city resource team. Few moments. Any questions? Any questions at all about what we've talked about this evening? Wow, this is incredible. Okay, being none, and we will break into focus groups, this is the time of the meeting where anybody gets to address any agenda item or non-agenda item they would like. You may do so at this time.
If you're a member of two groups, how is that going to be, or if you want to be a member?
For tonight, okay. Well, we have to, we'll work through that whenever we do the scheduling, because depending on how the scheduling washes out, it may be difficult. You may want to reevaluate that. Tonight, what we're asking you to do is just go to the group that's your number one choice.
And then you have a worksheet where you put your priorities.
Right, right. Okay. No agenda or non-agenda items. I'm going to tell you where the different focus groups are going to meet right now. And so if you are in the economic health, let me show of hands. Who all is economic health? Okay, not bad, not bad. We're going to be meeting over in this side of the room, over there where Nick is in the white shirt, okay? If you are environmental quality, we're also meeting over there. We're meeting, environmental quality and economic health are meeting together. Okay. If you are community design, show of hands, who's community design? Okay, good. You folks are just about all the way over there anyway. Safety and wellness. How many safety and, oops. Okay, community design, safety and wellness will meet over on this side of the room, okay, with Jana. And how many of you are housing? Housing, you will meet with Kate in the Jack Reedy conference room, right around the corner. I'm sorry? Oh, everybody. Okay. How many livability? Okay. I'm told you will also be in the Jack Reedy conference room. Okay, so housing and livability, Jack Reedy conference room right around the corner. Safety and wellness, community design, over here with Jana. Economic health and environmental quality, over here with me.
Get your pizza first.
grab some pizza and let's get started. Thank you.